Well, welcome to episode 2 of 10-Minute Record Reviews, and today we're going to talk about the classic 1964 release Getz, Gilberto, which is a landmark. It's a jazz landmark. It's a landmark in bossa nova. It's a remarkable record in a lot of ways. It's hailed as the kind of I guess it's seen as the breakthrough and at the same time the high point of the bossa nova craze, outside Brazil. But it isn't. I mean, it is a bossa nova record. Clearly, the songs are all Jobim, or 3/4 of them are Tom Jobim compositions. But it's a fusion record because it includes elements of American jazz. Jazz had enjoyed, if not supremacy, at least pretty good market share in the 1950s. But rock and roll had really started to eat into that, and that led jazz musicians to start to cast about to look for other avenues, other influences to again, to sort of raise the relevance of jazz. And as luck would have it, part of that emerged through some early 60s collaborations between American jazz musicians and Brazilian, essentially folk music, pop artists in doing what has come to be termed bossa nova music. And these include people like Vinicius de Moraes, Tom Jobim, and João Gilberto, and lots of other folks. But really, those three names are amongst the most significant at the beginning of the late in the end of the 50s and beginning of the 60s. There are some amusing personal aspects to the way this came together. So the idea was that Getz invites João Gilberto, who's acknowledged. I mean, Jobim was very much the composer in chief of the bossa nova movement, but João Gilberto was very much the performer of the moment, and so Gilberto and Getz decided to make this record. Jobim, of course, who's the great composer, is invited along, and it's actually kind of a funny thing that Jobim is only, as you'll see, is credited as featuring. He gets a featuring credit, but he's not given top billing here. When again 6 of the 8 songs are actually his, and he plays. He doesn't sing, but he plays on the record. His singing was never his strong suit, I don't think, but his playing was great. So the record begins with a song which is gone from cool to cliche, back to cool, then back to cliche in a kind of sort of a retro revisionist way, but then back to cool. It is a fundamentally brilliant song, and I'm talking, of course, about "The Girl from Ipanema," which has so many magical elements to it. It had, first of all, the melody and the story of the song are fantastic. The contrast, this is where we're first introduced to the contrast between the beautiful, cool, rhythmic, calm, mellow and melancholy sound of bossa nova with Getz's saxophone, which cuts through that feeling and yet complements it, doesn't necessarily take it in a different direction. The other piece, of course, is that this is the debut of the singing debut, certainly in terms of the order of songs in the record, of Astrid Gilberto, and she is who of course went on to a great career of her own. This is the first time she had sung on record. Exactly how she comes to be in the studio. Well, she comes to be in the studio because she's married to one of the people who's making the record, but she had never sung professionally. In theory, they wanted Sarah Vaughan to do the vocals in this album, but she wasn't available. So, and the story varies as to who exactly did she volunteer herself, or was she volunteered by somebody else. Anyway, she ends up singing, and her voice is a revelation. It becomes weirdly 5 or 6 years into the bossa nova thing, it becomes the signature sound of bossa nova. her lack of vibrato, this very sort of plain delivery, but very emotional delivery, and which becomes again a signature of bossa nova, and actually an influence on her husband and lots of other people who had innovated the sound in the first place. It, it, it's also kind of funny that if you read the liner notes to this album, you see the liner notes from her husband saying, you know, this is this was a real kind of a family collaboration. You know, sort of we were communicating through our wives because our wives could speak English and so on. So not long after this record was made, or maybe shortly there, or maybe even during, I guess the communication with between Astrid Gilberto and Stan Getz was so good that they began an affair, which led to the dissolution of the Gilberto's marriage, and Getz and Astrid then having a thing which lasted 2 or 3 years, and she went off to the United States with him and so on. So it's kind of a bit bittersweet reading those notes. Then we're into Dora Liche, which is this light, airy, quintessentially bossa nova song. It's very much, you know, Getz's sax sounds, I think, a lot like Paul Desmond's came to. Dora Liche, of course, was not a Jobim composition. Neither was Para Machucar Mi Coração, or To Wound My Heart, which is the third song on side one, which was written by a guy called Ari Barroso in the 1940s. So it's not a bossa nova song. It's from an earlier kind of more sort of a theme of sort of or a period of sort of patriotic, you know, Brazilian music in the 1940s. I think it's an achingly beautiful tune, so lovely. And then the very famous song to close side one, Decifinato, meaning off key, which I think is maybe the single best interweaving of João Gilberto's voice and Getz's saxophone. Just really, really quite remarkable. Side two kicks off with another classic, and this album is absolutely laden with them. It's Corcovado, or Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars, which was subsequently covered by a zillion people, including Frank Sinatra, who did a bossa nova album a few years later with Jobim and a few other folks. But it's never done better than here. It's absolutely captivating, and Astrid Gilberto's vocal here is just phenomenal. Then you have So Danço Samba, which is from a film score, which serves, I think, to lighten the mood a bit. It's an upbeat, sort of dancey kind of tune. And another lovely song, O Grande Amor, which starts with a Getz sort of vamp on saxophone, accompanied by Jobim on piano. Again, Jobim is playing piano all the way through this record. Then quickly settles into a bossa rhythm. It's a song which I think really there's a concept in bossa nova, which is a Brazilian word, a Portuguese word, which, and forgive me for my pronunciation, saudade, which is often translated as the blues, but is much better translated, I think, as longing, sort of melancholy, which this idea which sort of suffuses so much of bossa nova music, and O Grande Amor is a great example. And then the album closes out with Viva Soando, which is probably the most sort of lightweight, sort of generic bossa nova song on here. It's a good song by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe not reaching the heights of some of the others. So what to say about this overall? I have to say there are not many albums I would give this to, but this is a 5-star out of 5 album. It's effectively flawless. The song selection is consistently good. A lot of other bossa nova records, and I've listened to a lot of them, often are burdened with sort of quirky song selection. There's a lot of reliance on standards in bossa nova, and there are lots of standards here, but they're delivered absolutely flawlessly. And I guess the magic of this record is that there are 4 world-class musicians on this date, and I find myself, having listened to this album 200-300 times, I'm left wanting more of all of them every single time out, and it's beautifully restrained in how much of the brilliance of each you get to hear. I think Creed Taylor deserves a lot of credit for that, but ultimately it's the players on here, Getz, the 2 Gilbertos, and Jobim, who have created something which was bigger than bossa nova, bigger than jazz, and bigger than pop, and defies any effort to sort of render it irrelevant or cheesy or loungy. It's timeless. So it's essential. If you don't have this, get it. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. Thanks.